My first video in the series, which will be number 2, there we go, first number 2, was before I was born. So how did that happen? Well, here we go. My dad, my father, was called Charles Arthur Orange, and he was born in Rugby on the 19th of December 1916, and that was during the First World War. 1916 and 17 were actually the worst 2 years of the First World War. There was more deaths on the front line, particularly on the Western Front. And he died on the 15th of August 1991. So he lived to the grand age of 74. And my granddad on my father's side, he was called Arthur Orange as well. He was born in the year 1890 and he died in the year 1929. So he was only 39 years when he died. He suffered from asthma, and emphysema like my dad. But unlike my dad, there wasn't the medication in those days, and so he died. My grandmother on my dad's side, she was called Florence Martin. Martin was her maiden name, and she was born in 1893, and she died in 1933 at the age of 40. So by the age of 17 in 1933, my dad had lost both his parents, and so that was the situation there. My mother, she was born Ethel Edna Florence Sutton. She was born on the 4th of February 1925 and died on the 6th of February 1983 at the age of 59. She died really of bowel and esophagus cancer, and very painful it was, but that was that. My mum's mum, that's my grandmother, Emily Florence Bishop. She was born 19th of June 1891, died on the 29th of, she was born the 31st of May 1890 and died on the 29th of December 1963. And I can remember the policeman coming to the door. That's how they did it in those days, to tell my parents that her mother had died. She got to the age of 73. My grandfather on my mum's side was Edward George Bromwich Sutton. Had long names in those days, didn't they? But we all knew him as Ted, and you'll meet him a bit later on. And he was born 19th of June 1891 and he died on the 2nd of October 1976. He lived longer than all of us, and so far anyway, and he got to 85. We had no one exceptional in our family on either side except one, and we had one. And we had a Church of England bishop called Bishop Joseph Hall, born on the 1st of July 1574. Yes, I had to go back a bit to find one. And he died on the 8th of September 1656 at the age of 82. And so if you want to find out about him, see my next video and I'll tell you all about him. My dad's parents went to the Cambridge Street Methodist Church in Rugby, and those who will know it became the Rugby Elim Church in 1983. But so that's where he went, and he was christened in that church as well in January 1917. My father's parents, they'd moved from Loughborough, so all my dad's family were from Loughborough and Leicestershire up that way, to Rugby in 1914, which was the outbreak of the First World War. He'd finished his apprenticeship at a company called the Brushworks, and us who worked in engineering know the Brushworks very well. And so he'd done it, and he was just told he had to go at the outbreak of war. He'd finished his time and as an apprenticeship, and so he and his wife came to Rugby. And to say they attended Cambridge Street Methodist. They sat in what was called seat rents. They rented a seat. I remember my dad telling me that they had a family pew, and they had to pay for it, and so it was until 1999 that system was there. So my dad's family paid for these rented seats as they attended Cambridge Street, the church, and I say he was christened January 1970. The scheme was suspended in 1919, and it was superseded by giving in envelopes. Although he was brought up in Cambridge Street Methodist Church, and I know he told me once his grandmother on his dad's side, Grandma Orange, was a fine Christian, and one or two other of his families were. He had an Uncle Albert, and his Aunt Florrie, and they were quite well off. They even owned a car. I do believe he even owned an American car at one time, so a bit flash, but they were Christians as well. But didn't make perhaps too much of an impression on him, as he did the normal things that teenage boys do, but in those days, possibly being without a mum and dad at 70 may have affected him. He started work in 1930, which was after the Wall Street crash of 1929, and he was working he had several jobs, but eventually in 1935 he was working in a laundry in Castle Street. Now those from Rugby will know where Wetherspoons is. Well, that's Castle Street. And by that time there was known as what the Rugby Evangelistic Band, who would meet on Saturdays and hold open air meetings in and around Rugby and the villages. And that particular time, they were having this service, open air service in Castle Street. And my dad, he heard the gospel preached in this open air, and he gave his life to the Lord at the age of 19, and that's a significant milestone in anybody's family life, that my dad at the age of 19 heard the gospel and gave his life to the Lord Jesus. And my dad, like his dad before him, as I said, had health history problems, asthma, bronchitis, eczema. My dad suffered much in those particular days in his early life. Somebody once advised his mum to bathe it in vinegar, apparently. And I was told that they heard his screams in the next street, of course, and she actually paid for that. And that obviously didn't do any good at all, probably did more, well, certainly would have done more harm than good. It was said at the time when my dad got saved that he got saved just in time, as he suffered so much with his health. Hence, this evangelistic band would go on to open the first Rugby Elim church in Windsor Street in Rugby in October 1937. And my mother, like my dad, was an only child, and also like my dad was born in Windsor Street, so which is where the first Elim church was. My dad was born at number 5, my mum at 48, so there's quite a connection there, isn't there? My mother was 9 years old, 9 years younger, than my dad. So when the Rugby Elim Church opens in Windsor Street, which was actually in November 1937, my mum was age 12, my dad was 21. So my mum, as a rather shy young girl, went to the church at the top of Windsor Street, where the very first pastor, Pastor Jack Newman, and his wife Gladys. And Gladys, I knew both of them, obviously later on. And but they were a lovely couple, and Gladys particularly made my mum very welcome, so much that she stayed in the church, heard the gospel, and gave her life to the Lord Jesus. So there we go, both my parents loving the Lord. Then the Second World War came, and during the end of, or just after the end of 1945, I'm not exactly sure, towards the end of the war or just after, we were the Rugby Elim Church, but there's a very similar church to ours called the Assemblies of God. It's a Pentecostal church, very much like ours, similar to Elim, actually started by two brothers. And we know it as the AOG, and they wanted to start a church in Rugby. And to start the church, they had a series of meetings, and people in our rugby league church were asked to help, which they were more than keen to do. So, so my dad was asked if he would sing at one of the services, and he asked my mum if she would play, as both my parents could actually play the piano. And so apparently that's when they started courting, after my mum had played the piano and he'd sang. How it sounded, I don't know, but they're both good singers and they could both play the piano quite reasonably. They were the first couple to get married in Rugby League Church on the 1st of June 1946, so that's just a year after the war. My mum's mum, my grandmother, wouldn't attend my parents' wedding due to the fact that my dad's health was so poor she thought he would not be able to provide for her and maybe soon make her a widow. Just shows you, doesn't it? My dad actually, it was the eczema that was more obviously visible. And I know he was in digs at the time and he was actually thrown out of digs because the eczema went onto the blankets and people thought they could catch it from that, which you couldn't, but that's what people thought. And so it's just the way it was. And she also thought that us children would inherit my dad's illness as he had inherited his dad's. But my dad, I know, prayed that we wouldn't, and we didn't. So we're very thankful to that. My sister Janet was born on the 7th July 1949, and I came along on the 7th July 1952. So that's how I arrived here, and that's my background.